Hello and thanks for joining us for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Mitchell Ringos. Well, OPP now say there is no obvious indication of foul play in the sudden death of 3 men at a home in Hudson near Sioux Lookout. Police and EMS were called to the residence just before 1 o'clock last Saturday afternoon, where they discovered 3 occupants with no vital signs. Postmortems were completed in Toronto, but the specific causes of death will not be released at this time. The investigation is ongoing and police are asking anyone with information to contact Crime Stoppers or the Sioux Lookout OPP. 1 person has died following a highway crash near Ignace just before midnight Wednesday. The 2-vehicle collision closed the Trans-Canada Highway for more than 10 hours. The crash happened just before midnight in Revel Township west of Ignace. Eyewitnesses have posted online indicating it was a transport truck and an empty wood chip truck which collided. OPP have confirmed that a 66-year-old Thunder Bay man was pronounced dead at the scene, but there were no other injuries. The highway reopened to alternating traffic at around 10 o'clock Thursday morning, and both lanes reopened just before noon. OPP are asking anyone with information about how the crash occurred to contact police or Crime Stoppers. In the absence of mask mandates, public health officials in the western part of the region are urging the public to take it upon themselves to mask up and prevent the spread of disease. The Northwest Health Unit and a number of hospital CEOs are sounding the alarm about the impact rising cases and respiratory illnesses are having, particularly on ERs and pediatric care. Lee Noonan reports.
With waves of COVID, the flu, and RSV hitting at the same time, public health officials in the western part of the region are imploring the public to protect themselves, each other, and the healthcare system itself by wearing masks, getting vaccinated, and staying home when sick or when there's illness in the home. Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kit Young-hoon, says the worsening situation could have drastic impacts on the area's healthcare system.
In recent weeks in our region, we have seen a rapid increase in hospitalizations and emergency department visits for respiratory illness, particularly for children. Based on this information, we are facing a potentially difficult winter season. And now is the time to take action to dampen the surge in respiratory illness that is beginning to occur.
With rates of respiratory illness only expected to increase, CEOs of 3 area hospitals spoke up about the impact it could have on hospital capacity.
We are often 1 or 2 sick calls away, either physician or staffing wise, from having to close. So very important to protect our patients and our community and our healthcare providers.
People still have heart attacks and strokes and those sorts of things, accidents and whatnot that need to be cared for. So there has to be capacity in the system to care for the normal things that go on with people outside these, enormous surges of 3, in particular, respiratory illnesses.
You're not going to get mandated, but we would ask you to seriously consider that as a way of protecting you and your families and protecting our capacity, because we do need it for people who require service. And if we get overwhelmed, there will be people who need service that won't get it. And that's what I worry about the most.
In particular, officials are concerned about the health of young children. Reset says the proportion of kids under 16 in his ER has increased from 14% last month to 25% so far in November, mostly with respiratory conditions. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
The Transportation Safety Board has wrapped up its probe into a fatal plane crash near Sioux Lookout in April that killed 4 people, including 2 wanted fugitives. The private plane from BC had fueled up in Dryden and was headed east when it appeared to have zigzagged into the night sky and went down in the thick forest.
The aircraft was totally destroyed when it impacted the treetops. There was a wing tore off. It was there was not much recognizable at the time when we looked at it.
Police in BC confirmed one of the victims, 36-year-old Jean Larkamp, was the #2 most wanted fugitive in the country for murdering a man in Thailand. Another victim was 37-year-old Duncan Bailey from Kamloops, who was facing charges in a different murder. The pilot was identified as 26-year-old Abby Nav Handa of Richmond, BC. The TSB says Handa was not licensed to fly at night, and he also wasn't certified to use flight instruments. PDIN says the inexperience likely contributed to the crash.
If you're under visual flight rules, you're flying with reference to objects on the ground. When it gets dark and there's an absence of light, it gets extremely difficult to do that.
The Chiefs of Ontario are formally supporting the Mattawa Chiefs in asserting sovereignty over the Ring of Fire region. A resolution recognizing the Mattawa First Nations as inherent rights holders and decision makers on any development in Mattawa territory was passed on Wednesday during the Fall Assembly.
Today, government and industry want to come in our lands and take those resources out. Yes, we support development if it supports us, just as the lands have supported us since time immemorial.
A majority of delegates supported the resolution put forward by the Chiefs of Martin Falls and Constance Lake First Nations. However, there was some pushback from adjacent communities who expressed concerns about the impact development in the Ring of Fire could have downstream in shared watersheds and the impacts of mining transportation corridors through other territories.
I feel left out when I see this because it's going to have a direct impact in my community. We do have overlapping land jurisdiction, and it's important that you recognize other communities that will be directly impacted.
Amendments to the motion were added to acknowledge the potential impact of development on other First Nations and the role they all hold as stewards of the lands and resources. The chief of Gull Bay First Nation is calling for an OPP sergeant to be removed from active service due to a series of human rights complaints. Chief Wilfred King hosted a news conference at Queen's Park this week to shine a light on the allegations, including one from an Indigenous man who says he was dropped off on the side of a barren highway in 2019. Jonathan Wilson reports.
She is a bad apple and she should be removed from the OPP.
Gull Bay Chief Wilfred King held this news conference in Toronto alongside MPP Saul Mamakwa and human rights lawyer Chantal Bryson to outline the claims about a sergeant from the Armstrong OPP detachment. Two of the complaints involve questionable arrests of Gull Bay members. The most serious claim involves Jeremiah Skunk, who was taken into custody after an argument with his girlfriend in the summer of 2019. The sergeant allegedly dropped him off somewhere along Highway 527 between Armstrong and Gull Bay to fend for himself. The OPP have issued a statement saying the sergeant in question has not served in Armstrong since February 2022, no longer resides in the area, and has been assigned to another part of the province.
For us, that is unacceptable. She is still policing, and she poses a constant and danger to not only First Nations people, but all citizens of Ontario.
Although there was an initial responsiveness from Commissioner Carrique to this most serious Starlight Tour complaint involving Mr. Skunk, it then vanished.
Bryson and King say Skunk only received one follow-up phone call from the OPP over a year ago, and Skunk can't recall being told the outcome of any investigation. The OPP won't comment on potential discipline, but the spokesperson says the allegations were investigated by the Professional Standards Unit, and Skunk was notified of the findings. The spokesperson adds that the OPP did provide a response earlier this year to Bryson, who says she only received a one-paragraph email.
The witnesses, including his girlfriend and her mom, and the KZA Constable Edmund King Jr., who found Mr. Skunk, have never been interviewed. So I don't know how you could call that an investigation.
Mamakwa says he wants OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrique to respond to Gull Bay immediately.
If there's no response, we will move up the ladder of the upper echelons of this government, whether it's the Solicitor General, and to be able to respond to these issues. And because we cannot continue to accept racism to be part of the system.
Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
Up next, 20 years after exposure, Dryden mill workers are still looking for answers. Workers who may have gotten sick after working construction at the Dryden Mill 20 years ago are invited to come and share their stories at a virtual town hall as part of the Dryden RB4 air emissions project.
Lots of nasal congestion and raw throat. A little bit of bloody stuff coming out of my nose occasionally. Coughing up huge phlegm balls. And we called it the Weyerhaeuser flu.
Tudarachi says his symptoms only got worse from there. He was one of hundreds of workers who built the Weyerhaeuser recovery boiler number 4 between 2002 and 2004 while the mill continued running. He says the smoke was sometimes so thick they couldn't see each other as they worked. Tudarachi says he was part of several informal walkouts as he and other workers started to get sick.
The particulate fallout and the gases were coming like right over top of our heads the whole time we worked there. And then the guys that would stay when everybody walked out were some of the guys that got the sickest. There's a few that aren't here now.
Tudarachi believes management was aware that working conditions were unsafe, and he hopes to see someone take responsibility. Tuesday's virtual town hall is open to the public, with friends and families of affected workers strongly encouraged to attend. Details are available at thunderbayinjuredworkers.com. Following a landslide victory, Dryden's new mayor Jack Harrison was sworn in on Tuesday. The first time politician beat out former councillor Shane McKinnon with 69% of the vote.
This is my first venture into politics from working in the forest industry in the business world. So just like starting a new job, it's all new and wonderful and excited to get started.
Harrison says he's no stranger to a steep learning curve and has already been studying the city's strategic plan. Over the next 4 years, he wants to prioritize fiscal responsibility and maintaining public services, as well as looking at waterfront development and increasing long-term care beds. He also wants to see special treatment for Dryden when it comes to possible nuclear waste site nearby.
We want to ensure that this site is absolutely safe for our water supply and for our area. And if we don't feel it is, then we will be making presentations to the environmental hearing to stop it if we feel that it's not going to be beneficial for us from an environmental point of view.
With the proximity of the site to Dryden, Harrison believes many workers would opt to live in the city rather than in Ignace, and says he will apply for funding to study the potential cost and benefits. The new mayor and council in Atikokan were also sworn in this week. Two-term councillor Rob Ferguson won the mayor's chair in last month's election. He's now taking the reins from longtime mayor Denise Brown, who chose to retire from politics. Jonathan Wilson reports.
It was bittersweet taking over from Mayor Brown.
Rob Ferguson knows he has some big shoes to fill as he replaces Dennis Brown as mayor of Atikokan. Brown spent 4 decades on the town council, including 25 years as reeve or mayor. But now that he's in his 80s, Brown decided it was time to take a step back.
And I've known Mayor Brown for for 50 years of my life, so I have a good relationship with Mayor Brown, and I would have never ran if Mayor Brown was going again, but since Mayor Brown decided not to go, I thought it was my time to step in and take the reins.
And Rob was on council for 8 years, and he certainly helped us out, and I'm glad he's the mayor now. He'll certainly help Atikokan.
The new Atikokan Council was sworn in on Monday and includes 4 new town councillors and 3 veterans, including Ferguson. He says they have a good mix of young and old, and he wants to get all council members more involved in shaping Atikokan's future.
We're trying to find some efficiencies on the council side, and as well as transparency and accountability is what the residents wanted, and we want to move the town ahead for a new industry, kind of modernize things and bring more people in town.
Ferguson is currently the Senior Manager of Maintenance and Production at the OPG power plant just outside Atikokan. He says he got the blessing of his employer to run for mayor and sees the two roles working hand in hand.
What's good for Atikokan is good for Atikokan GS and vice versa. So there's a lot of synergies working between the two. I can bring a lot of good things to the town through OPG and vice versa for OPG from the town. So yeah, it's going to be busy.
And if things get a little too busy, Brown says his phone line is always open for Ferguson to call. Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
Earlier this week, officials from the town of Marathon and the Marathon Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation came together to break ground on a new $21 million housing project. The 50-unit, 50,000 square foot multifamily housing complex is an effort to address the community's ever-growing need for affordable housing. Project leaders are promising that at least 30% of the units will be priced at a rental cost of less than 80% market value. It's a project that Marathon Mayor Rick Dumas believes will more than accommodate the needs of the community, both now and for years to come.
But also more exciting, the fact is that there's 50 units, 52 bedroom units with a really modern looking building that's going to be developed and built for all the needs of our community, not just the lower income individuals, but also market driven individuals as well.
The Jen Drawn North Shore Living Complex is expected to be ready for its first occupants in about 15 months. An official ceremony was held Wednesday to announce that Weegi-Wagnog Limited Partnership is taking over as landlord of the Stantec office in Innova Park. That's a partnership between the Beektigong Nishnawbeg and Fort William First Nations with the goal of investing in rental properties to help contribute to Thunder Bay's economy. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held to mark the occasion, featuring representatives from both First Nations and Stantec. It will still mean business as usual at Stantec, but with two First Nations now as landlords for the Innovative Drive office, Fort William First Nation Councillor Michelle Solomon says the benefits will extend to future generations.
This is a wonderful opportunity for both First Nations and our people to develop economic opportunities for the future of our children.
It is exciting, and we plan on expanding not only within Thunder Bay but within the other municipalities as well. Like I said, in there, Sault Ste. Marie, Toronto, Ottawa, it's limitless. The
First Nations Partnership is currently considering a building on Court Street, hoping to use it for affordable housing and office space. After the break, we'll take a look at the recent NAN Housing Summit. Anishinaabe Aski Nation is exploring community-based solutions to the housing crisis on First Nation communities. Chiefs and councillors, elders, and infrastructure professionals gathered in Thunder Bay this week at the first ever NAN Housing Summit. Mike Lang reports.
The Anishinaabe Aski Nation has launched a 3-year project to make housing safer and healthier in First Nations communities. More than 7,500 homes are currently needed across NAN's 51 communities. A 2-day housing summit wrapped up on Wednesday at the Nor'Wester Hotel. NAN Housing Director Michael McKay says the plan is to identify the specific needs of each community, collaborate with the provincial and federal governments for support and additional funding, and increase housing capacity with the help of infrastructure professionals.
We're really supporting the community's self-determination of creating their own housing system to provide those tools and resources to help them with developing their own housing system.
Infrastructure professionals spoke about how the housing strategy will be executed and fielded questions from community representatives in the audience. There were also panels and workshops and networking opportunities for communities to share ideas.
Communities could work together if they're, if they're, as an example, in the same winter road corridor, bulk purchasing. Maybe the other thing would be preparing of applications to funding programs. There was a lot of communities in the NAN territory that were successful with it, but they did have their challenges and with that, but there were some success stories we covered.
Mike Lang, TBT News.
Lakehead University and the Thunder Bay DSAB released a report on migration and homelessness. The study highlights the fact that 60% of people experiencing homelessness in the city migrated from somewhere else. The primary purpose of the research was to understand why so many people experiencing homelessness in the city seem to migrate from out of town or out of the province by asking 7 research questions through the process. To answer those questions, 3 methods of research were conducted, including point-in-time count, which saw 98 responses, a shelter survey, which saw 120 responses, and 17 one-on-one interviews. Faculty of Health and Behavioral Sciences Assistant Professor Ravi Gokani says the study results show that 69% of migration from neighboring districts comes from First Nation communities, with 77% of those surveyed being from Treaty 3 or Treaty 9, and that 54% of people surveyed come from neighboring districts.
The 2018 pit count found that about 20% of people from outside of province, but the study that we did found that a majority of people were actually migrating from a neighboring district. So we find that, Kenora, Rainy River, Cochrane is where most of the people have migrated from.
The study also shows that 43% of those surveyed migrated to Thunder Bay for family, friends, or a sense of community, while 22% migrated to the city for employment or education. And with all this new data now collected, the DSAB's Ken Ranta says undertaking the process and getting the results helps them make plans going forward.
Variety of responses that we've got and the direction that it points us in allows us to work with partners both locally and throughout Ontario to look at different opportunities, not only to reduce the number of homeless in Thunder Bay, but to meet the needs of individuals where they are so that they don't leave a home situation to become homeless.
Ranta says he is presenting the information to the DSAB board later this week. For anyone wanting to know more, you can read the full report at lakeheadu.ca. It was an exciting week for Wake the Giant as the organizers were granted $50,000 from the Canada Post Community Foundation. It's the first year the Postal Service has awarded its Truth and Reconciliation Signature Grant. Wake the Giant was recognized for its impact on Indigenous youth in Thunder Bay. A check presentation was held on Tuesday between representatives from Wake the Giant and Canada Post, with students from Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School attending as well. Canada Post raises money through the release of special stamps every year, with $1 from each pack of stamps going towards the foundation. Canada Post Rob Lackey spoke about why the Wake the Giant was so deserving of the money.
To me, it's all about gathering, as well as the musicians that come together for Wake the Giant festival. It's so big, and again, a lot of impact for sure. And that's why we want to make sure that the money goes to a great organization such as them.
I think a lot of it will go towards the workshops and some of the training behind there, getting that designed. But all of it helps a great cause and ultimately helps the youth get accustomed to the city.
Wake the Giant is a year-round initiative that culminates in a 2-day celebration each September for Indigenous youth from 24 remote communities. And that wraps up this edition of Northwest Newsweek.